Hello, BookTube. As you will know if you're familiar with this channel, my life is pretty much bounded on all sides by books and reading. There are a million of them here at Hyde Cottage, but they're also my profession, they're my passion, they've been my oldest friends, they're a large, large part of my life. It's not a question of most readers who go to their job, then they deal with their kids, they drop off relatives, they cook meals, and then if they're lucky and industrious about it, they can steal an hour or two to read at night before they go to bed. I love those readers. I think that's fantastic work of personal will. But for me, it's my whole life. It's all day long, every day. It's all night long, every night. It's a paycheck, but also a passion. And I don't just like reading books. I also like reading about books. I think most readers do. I like reading about books. I like reading about reading. This thing that totally defines my life. I like reading about that as well. So I thought I would do a starter kit of books for book lovers. Some of these will be familiar to you, maybe some of them won't be. I want to start with a figure who is synonymous with reading. He also was bounded completely on all sides by reading. It was his whole life. And he also wrote about it a lot. And that is Alberto Mangawa. A lot of you will know him. He wrote a history of reading. It's actually quite good reading. But I want to pick this one, A Reader on Reading, which is his book that is not only a collection of some book pieces, but also book meditations. This is not just a collection of book reviews, although there's nothing really just about that if the author is good enough, as we'll see on this list. But this one is far more genial, it's far more timeless, and my favorite book by this author. So I wanted to start the list off with that. But the next book on the list is big, and it's a browser's paradise. You're not supposed to read it from front to back just as one sitting, although I think you'll learn a lot if you do. But it reflects on the fact that when we talk about reading and talking about books and about reading, we are often talking about book reviews. My own profession. Book reviews are the reading world turning and looking upon itself. That's what they are. That's what they do. And so reading book reviews can be really fascinating. Believe it or not, it can be if the book reviewer is given a certain amount of freedom by their editor, and if they have found their voice, and that voice is entertaining, then reading book reviews can be entertaining, especially if you are following how they've changed over time. And there is a great book on that subject. The New York Times, which publishes the New York Times Sunday Book Review, which is, for good or ill, the gold standard of book reviewing in the English language world. Years and years ago, they did a big book called Books of the Century. That is a big collection of their book reviews going back over 100 years. This has all sorts of Mark Summers woodcut illustrations all throughout, etchings all throughout, but it has those reviews, starting with the earliest short ones that were unsigned, and that didn't have a whole lot in the way of voice or attitude, and going all the way to the present day when, at the end of this book, people who are writing book reviews for the New York Times Sunday Book Review know perfectly well they are in the spotlight. They know they are writing a star review, something that's going to influence thousands and thousands of people. And you can see that evolution in this book. I find it endlessly fascinating. Just endlessly fascinating to go through this. And it's not just, I firmly believe it's not just because this is actually a blueprint of my profession. This is a history of what I do. It's not just that. This will interest you anyway, even if you've never read any of the books that are being reviewed. That's the whole key of a good book review. But reading Books of the Century is going to underscore in your mind what we all know, which is no matter how much you read, you're not going to get to everything. Probably in a year or two of industrious reading, you could read every book that is reviewed in Books of the Century if you could find some of the earlier ones. But it would take a long time to do. And even then, you're not going to scratch the surface. No one is, not even me. No one is going to do anything but scratch the surface. And a lot of books about books reflect that fact and just meditate on it and sort of fight against it. And this is one of my favorite ones. This is by Sarah Nelson, and it's called So Many Books, So Little Time. A year of passionate reading, where we've got a figure of someone buried in books, just devoting themselves as a sort of book project. I'm going to read a lot in a year. I'm going to read more than I ever have, more than most people do. And it's charming. Just wonderful, charming, challenging, funny at times, very personal at other times. I loved it. If you haven't read it and you like this kind of book, I think that you'll really like it. Same thing with this next one. This is by Heather Cass White, and this is Books Promiscuously Read, Reading as a Way of Life. But this book is, despite the title, this is not talking about what I do. This is not talking about reading that is actually keeping the lights on. It's more along the lines of talking about what you do, which is reading as a way of life, meaning I can't imagine my life without it, even though there are some days when I'm so busy I only get a tiny bit of time to do it. This is much more aimed at that, and I thought it was wonderful. Just wonderful. No idea if I am blurbed on any of these books. I'm hoping that I'm blurbed on the paperback of Books Promiscuously Read. That would be wonderful. But I've loved them all. And one of the ways that you will get quotes from a book like Books Promiscuously Read or So Many Books, So Little Time is that some of them were lyrical passages. The lyrical passages in books like that are essays really about reading, the glory of reading, will usually take place in the first chapter and the final chapter of books like that. And those chapters will be labored over. The author will want them to stand out. A lot has been written on that subject. You don't want to retread old ground. And a lot of times those chapters will have great quotes. And those great quotes have been happening for centuries and can sometimes fill up a book. They fill up a couple of books on this list. But those meditations, those disembodied meditations on reading, where you're really talking about the glory, the life-changing aspect of this activity rather than one particular book or one particular school of books, that is covered in this book, which is by Jeffrey O'Brien. This is A Browser's Ecstasy, a meditation on reading, which will have a lot of pulled quotes from the earlier two books, but this is almost exclusively a meditation on reading. And if you're like me, you will love that sort of thing. It's not a long book. None of these things, except for the books of the century, are very long. But really, really, I wonder how much of it you will underline and say, oh, that's me. Oh, I identify with that. And that's one of the marvels of reading, is those moments. Right? No matter how different we all are from each other, even in this little corner booktube, we have everything from school teachers to librarians to physical therapists to data coders to everything. The one thing that we all have in common, one of the things that we have in common is that stolen moment. Those is the sheer bright passion that means no matter what else I do in my day, I'm going to make time for this weird thing where I go quiet and I don't want to be interrupted and it doesn't look like I'm doing anything, but I am allowing someone else to reach into my mind and rearrange the furniture. I'm letting someone else do that. That person might be thousands of years dead. I'm letting them do that. And I'm willing to come away from the experience a changed person. How amazing that is. It's such an amazing thing. We take reading for granted, but it is one of the most amazing things we can do. And we all do that. And we all feel the call to do that, no matter how different our lives are. And my next suggestion in this starter kit underscores that fact. Because that hunger, that bright, shining passion deep inside that sometimes feel hesitant even admitting to other people because most people don't read. 99% of people don't read. And when you're a diehard veteran reader, you will know that. You will be very conscious of that. You won't bring it up in a shared Uber ride. You won't bring it up in an airport waiting lounge. And we recognize each other. At a great distance, you recognize another. Oh, all right. I don't know anything about your life. I have no idea what you're like. But I know that you make time for this weird thing, and so do I. And this next one is a perfect example of that. Believe it or not, this is the Richard Burton Diaries. These are diaries of the actor Richard Burton, who you would think, being married to Elizabeth Taylor, being on stage and on screen with the greatest figures of film and theater in the 20th century, being a great actor himself, you would think that this has no connection with you. But he felt that. He felt that same thing. That bright little thread of obsession that made him say in any day, whether the day was lost in alcohol, or whether it was lost to making a great movie or a bad movie, no matter what it was, there was always that same feeling that you and I feel. I need to make time for this weird, wonderful thing that I do. I must make time for it. I can't imagine my life without it. So believe it or not, in the Richard Burton Diaries, you would think this would be all about the jet set and Elizabeth Taylor, but a lot of this is about books. He made time. He was a passionate lover of books for the whole of it. It's all through this diary thing. So believe it or not, if you've passed this over because you think it's just another celebrity diary thing, no, he was one of us. I loved his work before I knew that. I didn't know that until I read these diaries. He was one of us. You'll recognize it right away. He can't keep it out of his diaries. So that's a little bit, probably the oddest recommendation on here. But he writes those things down in his diaries. And I don't doubt that somewhere out there's a core collection of Richard Burton books where he also wrote Marginalia. He strikes me as just the type to not only write these reflections in his diaries and also in letters to friends, but also to write in his books. I feel certain of that. I'd love to know if that's true. Did he read some history of, the Boer Wars and make commentary on it? Write Marginality of one kind or another, even if it's just, look this book up, I want to read this too, or whatever. And we all do that a lot of us do that to one extent or another. I myself live by Marginality. I can't get away from it. I definitely respond to my books, and I do it on the front lines. I mean, my job is to respond to books for a public audience. But privately, before I get to that point, I am also responding to books in the margins. And this next book, is about that, and it's terrific. If you've done that, this is a book you're going to love. It's by H.J. Jackson, and it's called Marginalia. It's a study of Marginalia throughout history. Tons and tons of funny, great, touching examples. Marginalia, we have Marginalia in this book where a person wrote, I must investigate this, and we know they died the next day of a heart attack. There's Marginalia in here like, I must find this book by someone whose library is going to be bombed by the Nazis. So there aren't going to be any books. I must find this book at their abbreviations for their local library, and it's not going to exist in a week. All sorts of things, like going all the way back to the Middle Ages. People have been and annotating books for 1,000 years or more. And this is a great study of that. So I had to put this on this list. Then I mentioned earlier that studies about the sort of the disembodied glory of reading, the wonderful feel of reading, are wonderful to read in their own right, unless they're hackneyed, unless they're cliched. If I read one more time that a house without a library is like a body without a soul, I'm going to throw up. I mean, Cicero makes me throw up anyway. But if they're not hackneyed, then they can be great. Those meditations on the act of reading. But, like I mentioned, you'll often find those meditations in reviews or literary essays. That's where they mostly happen. And those things, as you know, if you watch this channel, have been collected many, many times into many, many books. And some of them are very much business. I'm collecting my book reviews from, the Sunday Nation or the National Review. Here are my book reviews. I'm barely going to annotate them. I will tell you what book I'm reviewing, but I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to change them. I'm not going to add to them. And I'm not going to... They were newspaper reviews, right? So 800 words, due on Friday, no falderall, no autobiographical digressions, no cutesy-poo stuff, no nothing like that. You're reviewing a book. I maintain, of course, that you can make that really good reading. I would like to think, I tell myself anyway, that I regularly make that kind of thing really good reading. Those are not deal-ending restrictions. You can still have a voice. You can still make that interesting reading. I'd like to think I do. And plenty of writers have. So collections of those kinds of things are just as worthwhile to be on this list as meditations on the act of reading itself, provided the collection is really good. Provided the insights are wonderful. And so I want to recommend The Eye of the Story by Eudora Welty. This is a collection of her literary essays and reviews, and it's amazing. In every word, in every phrase, it is amazing. Whether you know the books she's talking about or not. Plenty of times in plenty of pieces in here, she's not talking about any one particular book. But even when she is unbelievably worth reading. These are just beautifully, beautifully done. They're meditations, really, more than anything else. What a thrill it must have been to get a work of hers for the New York Review of Books or the Sewanee Review or whatever. What a thrill that must have been as an editor to get a piece from her. I bet you didn't need to change a word. But anyway, there are many, many books like this. I have hundreds of them, but I strongly wanted to recommend this one. Then I mentioned in the books of the century, and of course you're going to butt your head against it in a collection of reviews from somebody like Eudora Welty or John O'Hara or whatever. You're going to butt your head against the fact that you're not going to recognize a lot of these books, or some of them you are going to recognize, and you're not. I haven't got to them. I don't have a copy. I haven't got to them. Oh my God! What? This reviewer, in 1961, he was writing a review saying this is the greatest thing since sliced cheese. It's not in print anymore. It hasn't been in print in 20 years. Was that reviewer right? I don't know. How do I make sense of all of these titles, past and present? How do I make sense of them all? Well, there are books to help you with that. They're all acts of opinion. So you might not end up agreeing with them, but the best of them that I have found so far, a little bit biased here, but you need not know his personal history or mine. The best that I've found so far is this one. 1,000 books to read before you die. Notice the title is not saying 1,000 books you must read. This is not prescriptive. This is a sumptuously illustrated, beautifully wonky, personal, detailed tour by an inveterate reader through 1,000 of those books that you see in old reviews. Some of these you will have heard of, most of them. Some of them not. And this book will start arguments. I argued with it myself in print. There are plenty of things in here, plenty of choices I didn't understand, and some omissions that I didn't understand. And any book like this is going to be like that. But this will give you at least a kind of a shape to maybe come to grips with some of that endless list of books that you've seen reviewed. This might help you to make a list of your own. It might be expensive online, but the print version is definitely worth it to get. If you are, a dyed-in-the-wool book person, if that's what you are, you're going to want this. In between books, you're going to want to read this, argue with it, agree with it. It's the perfect, again, a browser's thing. It's just a perfect thing. And we can finish up with another one of those. This is another book lovers anthology. That's actually what it's called. And some of these can be really trite. These book anthologies can be really trite. They can be really dumb. And some of them aren't. Some of them are really good. And I want to finish up by recommending one of the best of them. It's put out by the Bodleian Library, and it's called The Book Lovers Anthology. And talk about endless. These are the typical things that you would expect. Contemporary reviews that got it wrong, ecstatic passages about the glory of reading, sections, chapters devoted to specific parts of reading. In other words, very similar, along the same lines as other anthologies like this that I'm sure you've seen. I've seen them too. They're not rare. But these, it's all a question of how well they're chosen, and these, the bits and pieces in here are chosen so well. This is the one I return to. I don't know how available it is, but it's terrific. If you're presented, in an online search or in a bookstore with a whole bunch of books like this, a whole bunch of book lover anthologies, this is the one to get. And a perfect way to end this little starter kit, because it really does cover all the ground of the rest of the books in here. Book reviews, book anthologies, all that sort of thing. So those are 10 suggestions for you. God almighty, I could have made this 100 suggestions. But those are 10 suggestions for you, 10 things that I can say will definitely scratch an itch when, in addition to reading, which we all work to make time for, you want to read about reading, which I think a lot of readers do. If you feel that urge, I often feel that urge, these 10 books, they're just what the doctor ordered. They will do just what you want. So there's a nice starter kit for your consideration. I'll wrap this up for now, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.